Let me ask you something. When was the last time you genuinely got curious about something? Maybe you wanted to know why you cannot get off your phone once you start scrolling social media, or why does the moon follow us as we are walking? Or perhaps you come across a new word and you get so curious about it, you want to know what does this new word actually mean? How to use it? Does it have any synonyms? Now here's something interesting. What if these moments of curiosity could actually help you develop your English? Because when I look back at my own journey, I see that it's not because I wanted to learn more English. It's only that I was curious enough to learn about things that I got involved with English. The more I thought about it from my own experiences, I have realized that curiosity works in 3 very different ways. And today's video, we will explore those 3 ways and we will see how we can bring in learning English language along with our natural tendency to be curious about things. Hello, my name is Siddharth, and for the past 5 years, I've been teaching students from science field to improve and develop their English communication. Let's begin. Now, before I get into my own experiences, I want to take a moment to understand what curiosity actually does to us. Usually, curiosity begins when we realize that there is a gap between what we know and what we would want to know. Something is happening, but you don't know why. You hear something, but you don't completely understand it. And that little gap creates a question. Why? How? What does that mean? And once that question becomes important enough to us, we naturally want to close that gap. We look for an answer. We search. Maybe we ask somebody or we try to pay more close attention. And this is where curiosity becomes particularly interesting for language learning. Because when you are genuinely curious about something, you are not trying to learn just for the sake of learning. You have a reason to pay attention, and researchers have actually studied this. But I don't want to make this video about the science of curiosity. And that is why when we said that curiosity works in 3 different ways, let's see the first one, which is the curiosity about the world around us. So the first one is very simple. I'm curious about something in the world and I want to know more about it. Simple curiosity. But when I look back, I realize that I've done this countless times without ever thinking of it as English practice. I have always been fascinated by music. It's an example I'm giving. I used to spend a lot of time reading about different musical genres, different artists, and the history behind the music that I was listening to at that time and even now. And a lot of that information was available to me in English only. I remember reading Wikipedia pages about different genres, and I wasn't reading them because I wanted to improve my English. I just wanted to know more about music. And while I was trying to satisfy that curiosity, English was constantly happening in the background. I would come across a new word, I would look it up. I would check how it was pronounced. I would notice how a sentence was constructed. I remember learning words like Baroque through this kind of exploration. And the interesting thing is, the English learning was almost incidental. I went looking for knowledge and I came back with the language. And it wasn't only music. I remember wondering why the moon seems to follow us when we are walking. I've searched for answers to questions like that in English. I've also watched videos because I wanted to solve some completely practical problem, like figuring out how to make my computer run faster. You don't have to be curious about something academic. It could be music, it could be technology, it could be cooking. The point is not that you should always search for everything in English. Sometimes your local language will give you a better explanation, especially when you're looking for something culturally or locally specific. But whenever you can, try this. Take something you are genuinely curious about and explore it through English. Because then English stops being the subject you are studying. It becomes the tool you are using to discover something you actually care about. And that, I think, is a completely different way of learning. Now here's the second type. Curiosity doesn't always have to be about the world. Sometimes the language itself becomes interesting. And this is probably the kind of curiosity I have experienced the most. I'll give you a very personal example. I've watched Amitabh Bachchan speak English quite a lot over the years, and I remember noticing things about the way he spoke. There was this word archive, for example, where I became conscious of how the word was actually pronounced. I used to call it archive. And it wasn't just individual words. I started noticing the way he would emphasize certain words when he was speaking. I would notice the rhythm of a sentence. I would notice the rise and fall of his voice when he asked a question. I would notice how he enunciated certain sounds. And the interesting thing is that at that time, I did not know the technical terms of most of these sounds, like intonation, sentence stress. Even I wasn't consciously studying pronunciation. And that's a good thing. You also do not need to know these technical terms. You just need to simply think, that's interesting. Why does he or she say it like that? And similarly, once you start paying attention, you will start noticing things that you would normally just hear and forget. You look it up, you listen to it again, you compare it with how you would say it, and then incorporate it into your own English. So there's another kind of curiosity here. The second one, like I talked about. The first was, I want to know something about the world. Well, this one is, I want to understand something about the language that I'm hearing. And then there's a third kind of curiosity. And this one happens when we are actually trying to communicate. Sometimes I know exactly what I want to say, but for some reason the word I want just doesn't come to me. For example, I might be talking in a classroom and I want to use the word invisible. Now I know the word. I know exactly what it means, but for some reason at that particular moment, I cannot retrieve it. Now I have two choices. I can stop, I can panic, I can think, oh no, I don't know this word. What will my students think about me? Or I can keep communicating. So I might just say, that person, he became something that we couldn't see. I know it's not the most elegant sentence in the world, but the idea has been communicated. And that's important. Not remembering a word doesn't have to mean that communication has failed. But later I remember that moment and I think, what was that word I was looking for? And then I look it up. And when I find it, invisible in this case, I have now connected that word to a real communicative need. And sometimes it's not even that I don't know the word. Sometimes I know exactly what I want to say, but after saying it, I think, I could have expressed that better. Maybe there was a more precise word, or perhaps a more natural expression, or a better way of structuring the sentence. And then that creates another question. How could I say this better? So I think there are actually two things happening here. Sometimes curiosity helps us fill a gap, like I don't know the word, what is it? While sometimes curiosity helps us refine what we already have. Like I know how to say this, but is there a better way? And I think this is one of the most useful ways to look at mistakes and moments of hesitation in English. Because the moment where you get stuck can become a learning opportunity. You can think, okay, that's interesting. I wasn't able to express that the way I wanted to. And instead of feeling embarrassment, you become curious. What was missing? How could I say it? How could I even say it better? And that gives you something very valuable. Your communication starts telling you what you need to learn next. So if we put these three experiences together, I think there's a pattern here. Curiosity can enter our English learning from three different directions. The first is curiosity about the world. The second is curiosity about language itself. And the third is curiosity about my own expression. And I think there's something really important here. None of these require you to sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to practice my English. Now, of course, deliberate practice has its place. Grammar study has its place. Vocabulary study also has its place. But language becomes much more alive and natural when there is a genuine reason behind it. Now, this, to me, is also a part of effective communication, because communication isn't only about transferring information from one person to another. Good communication can create a desire to discover more, and I think this is particularly important when we are learning English. So if all of this makes sense, the question is, what do we actually do with it? Because I don't want this to remain just an interesting idea about curiosity. I want you to try it, just how I have tried it. And you don't have to completely change the way you learn English. Just start noticing your curiosity. So, the next time you are curious about something, try exploring it in English. It could be something completely ordinary. Maybe you want to know why your phone gets hot. Maybe you are curious about a song. Maybe you want to understand something that happened in the news. Or maybe there's a scientific question you've always had. Take that question and see what you can discover through English. Then, when you're watching a movie, a series, a YouTube video, or listening to someone speak, pay attention to the moments when something about their English catches your attention. Then do not just think that's good English. Ask, why did they say it like that? And even better would be how I can use it myself. So look it up, listen again, and try it yourself. And finally, when you are speaking and you get stuck, don't immediately treat that moment as a failure. It is not. Ask yourself, what exactly was missing? Was it a word, a phrase, a grammatical structure? Or maybe you knew what to say, but you weren't happy with the way you said it. Yes, there can be a lot of things. So whatever it is, come back to it later, because if you start doing this consistently, something interesting happens. Your everyday life starts becoming your English classroom, or like an English world. The things you're curious about give you things to explore. The English you hear gives you things to notice, and your own communication gives you things to improve. You don't have to manufacture a reason to learn English every day. It's around you. You just have to be curious. So, when I think about all this, I don't think curiosity is just something that helps us learn English. I think it can change the way we approach communication altogether. You can be curious about the world, you can be curious about the language, and you can be curious about your own expression by saying, I want to know how to say this. Because communication doesn't have to be a performance where you're constantly trying to prove that your English is good enough. It can be an exploration, and perhaps the most beautiful thing is that the process can go both ways. Your curiosity helps you communicate, your communication creates new questions and subsequent curiosity. And when you communicate well, you can even make the other person curious. So it becomes a kind of cycle. Curiosity leads to exploration, exploration leads to communication. Communication creates new curiosity. And maybe that's one of the reasons language can keep growing throughout our lives. So the next time you sit down to improve your English, don't only ask yourself, what should I study today? Maybe ask yourself, what am I curious about today?